A huge issue for God among ancient peoples was the issue of idolatry. People had decided that they wanted a God that could be visible for them to see, and so they had undertaken to build gods of wood, of stone, and of metal, and of ceramics, or to worship the sun and the moon and the stars. But God had revealed to Abraham that he was greater than the sun and the moon and the stars, and that God was greater than anything that could be manufactured on earth. So how was God going to represent himself to his people, the children of Abraham, when he was not visible to them and did not want to be represented by the likeness of anything that he had made? And he chose to dwell among his people through the presence of a building, first of all the tabernacle, and now by the hands of Solomon by the temple. And the temple really becomes a very important focal point for the worship of God. Although, as Solomon has said, earth cannot contain the Lord, yet he has allowed a temple to be built, which can be a place where we can focus our prayers, a house of prayer for all nations, as the Lord Jesus declared. It would also be a place of sacrifice. Over the last 3,500 years, we've had 500 years of the tabernacle. It soon fell into disrepair, and 1,000 years of the temple, 2 different buildings, but the bulk of this time there has been no physical temple. For in the New Testament period, the temple is in fact the church, a building of living stones, believers in the Lord Jesus Christ, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, a dwelling place of God by his Spirit. But that understanding of God comes to us from understanding the role that the physical temple had and the physical tabernacle had. And so the writer of 2 Chronicles, having told us in chapter 2 of Solomon planning to build the temple, building on the work that his father had done for 20 years previously, now he undertakes the project in chapter 3. Now Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord appeared to his father David, at the place that David had prepared on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And he began to build on the 2nd day of the 2nd month, in the 4th year of his reign. Now this is the foundation that Solomon laid for building the house of God. The length was 60 cubits, by cubits according to the former measure, and the width 20 cubits. And the vestibule that was in front of the sanctuary was 20 cubits long across the width of the house, and the height was 120. He overlaid the inside with pure gold. The larger room he panelled with cypress, which he overlaid with fine gold, and he carved palm trees and chainwork on it. And he decorated the house with precious stones for beauty, and the gold was gold from Parvaim. He also overlaid the house, the beams, and doorposts, its walls and doors, with gold, and he carved cherubim on the walls. And he made the most holy place. Its length was according to the width of the house, 20 cubits, and its width 20 cubits. He overlaid it with 600 talents of fine gold. The weight of the nails was 50 shekels of gold, and he overlaid the upper area with gold. In the most holy place he made 2 cherubim, fashioned by carving, and overlaid them with gold. The wings of the cherubim were 20 cubits in overall length. One wing of the one cherub was 5 cubits, touching the wall of the room. The other wing was 5 cubits, touching the wing of the other cherub. One wing of the other cherub was 5 cubits, touching the wall of the room, and the other wing was 5 cubits, touching the wing of the other cherub. The wings of these cherubim spanned 20 cubits overall. They stood on their feet, and they faced inward. And he made the veil of blue, purple, crimson, and fine linen, and wove cherubim into it. Also he made in front of the temple 2 pillars, 35 cubits high, and the capital that was on the top of each of them was 5 cubits. He made wreaths of chainwork, as in the inner sanctuary, and put them on top of the pillars. He made 100 pomegranates, and put them in the wreaths of chainwork. Then he set up the pillars before the temple, one on the right hand and the other on the left. He called the name of the one on the right hand Jachin, and the name of the one on the left Boaz. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together some thoughts from 2 Chronicles chapter 3. So it took Solomon several years just to get organised, which is why a whole chapter was devoted to that, chapter 2. We are told the temple was built on Mount Moriah, on and the Jebusites' threshing floor, a place that David had acquired for it. But we're first introduced to Mount Moriah back in the story of Abraham. It was on the mountains of Moriah that Abraham offered Isaac, and it would be in that vicinity that the Lord Jesus would be offered as a sacrifice for our sin. We're told the size was 60 cubits according to the former measure. It seems there are 3 different measures of the cubit in ancient times. One was about 22 inches, one was about 20 inches, and one was about 18 inches. The longer ones used in antiquity. The longest one is 55 centimetres. The intermediate one is 50 centimetres, and the short one is half a yard. So, working on the half-metre cubit, 20 cubits is 10 metres. So the temple was 10 metres wide and 30 metres deep. The manuscript record the height as 120, which is extraordinarily high, but a few manuscripts only read 20, which is 10 metres, which is consistent with the record in the Book of Kings, 3 stories high. The temple had a similar plan to the tabernacle. It was just twice the size. But in front there were 2 huge pillars, 20 metres high, with very fancy capitals on the top, one standing on the right and one standing on the left of the temple. The structure of the building was of stone, overlaid with timber, overlaid with fine gold, which had angels, cherubim, carved into it. It was divided into 2 rooms, the front room being 10 metres by 20 metres, and the back room, the most holy place, being 10 metres square, actually a cube. And in the most holy place, where the Ark of the Covenant would be put, there were the 2 cherubim, the angels that defend the honour of God, overshadowing the mercy seat, which was envisaged as the throne of God, each with 2 wings spread out, so that with their wings spread out, they spanned the total width of the most holy place. And the division into 2 rooms was by the curtain. It wasn't a solid wall, but it was a curtain, as it had been in the tabernacle. The pillars were called Jachin, which means he shall establish, and Boaz, in it is strength, speaking of the purposes of God and the power of God. The decoration on the capitals, 100 pomegranates, speaking of fruitfulness. We know that the high priest's garment was also decorated by bells and pomegranates, again speaking of fruitfulness, but the bells speaking of proclamation. And so the temple followed the pattern of the tabernacle and followed the glory of the tabernacle, for Solomon's purpose was to build a building that would bring great glory to the God of Israel. But God is not confined to one place, and so for most of history the temple has not existed as a building. Moses was instructed to build the temple after the pattern that was shown him on the mountain, and that pattern points us to the ministry of the Lord Jesus Christ. And believers in God today gather to the Lord Jesus Christ, not to a building in Jerusalem.